Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis Gianotsous. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianotsous.
James, the show here is called Leadership is Changing. When I say that statement, what does that mean for you?
Leadership is changing for a lot of reasons, I think, because you certainly have the standard ones, politics, tax policy, where companies are driven by tax policy, they're driven by trade agreements, right? So you have, for example, right now, Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz and General Motors, they produce a lot of cars in China. What's going to happen? I have to all figure this out. I advise a man who's the president of one of the major global companies, and he's also the CFO of this company. And he asked me recently to write a speech for him. And I said, if it's okay with you, I'm going to title it, "The CFO Has a Soul."
Nice.
Okay, so you don't usually think of CFOs, right? They're just like numbers people, right? Today, a CFO has to be much more multifaceted. I think in the past, you could have an accounting degree and be a CFO, right? Today, you have to know not only numbers, but you have to be prescient. You have to be prophetic. You have to be thinking, okay, what is going to affect not only next quarter or next year, but you have to think 10 years out, 20 years out, what's going to be happening. You have to understand markets as much as numbers. So I think all these jobs are taking on many different facets. So if you're the CEO, he's the president of this company. If you're CEO of a company, you have to, and this is where there's a huge deficit, you have to be, Reagan said, they criticized him for being an actor, right? As if an actor couldn't become president, right? So it was just a way of demeaning him, right? So he said, he always knew how to turn a phrase, right? So he said, I actually amazed that anyone could be filling this job if they weren't an actor.
Beautiful.
Right? This is what I say about CEOs today. You know that only 23% of all business schools require an MBA graduate to have studied public speaking. Now, I have to tell you this. Not just because I have this book and not just because I coach CEOs to speak, but I would say this. I would sit here and I would say to you, Dennis, that a course in public speaking is more important than a course in accounting.
I totally agree. Totally.
Think about it. Look at all these CEOs. They can't even talk. Look at Elon Musk, who I have huge admiration for. I want to drive a Tesla, right? So Elon Musk, he gets an SEC violation because he's smoking a joint and he calls up or he sends out a tweet, some ridiculous thing about his equity value of his company, and he influences the stock price, the fluctuation of the equity in his company. These people they think because they make a lot of money or they're in a powerful position that they don't have to be able to communicate. And boy, that's the biggest downfall when they figure out that they have to be able to speak. I think so. That's one area I think where there's a massive amount of change and evolution. I think certainly the whole global multilateral relations. I think, for example, look at the phenomenon of Davos. So all these global CEOs coming together, right, to address this. You have right now an evolution, I think, in impact and ESG where the marketplace isn't completely pivoted yet, but you have a lot of companies trying to lead the way in climate issues, sustainability, habitats, all this kind of thing. They're wrestling with this issue, and some of them have got it wrong. Some of them have it right. Some of them think they're immune to it, and they want to know where the consumer is going, certainly, and they're sending a little bit of mixed messages. The media sends one kind of message, but you have to think these things through for yourself. So I would say this. in summary about the change of leadership, I would say that it is an almost lethal time to be a leader because you're so watched by not just the media, but stakeholders, shareholders. They want to know what you're thinking at every moment, and you have to be responsive to them in ways that you've never had to be responsive before. And I think it's a tremendously serious time for leaders. But we also, at the same time, need more leaders who will stand up, be stand-up characters, and to lead by offering their own examples and their own authenticity and their own words that raise us up. People are afraid. This is one more thing about Reagan, not to bore you with this, but one of the reasons Reagan was so popular. I'll ask you this question. Do you know why one of the reasons Reagan was so popular? And that was he told people that they were good. And I've seen this with myself. So I give a lot of speeches, right? And I've noticed that when I tell people that they're good and that they've done well and that they've worked hard and they're like, really? Do you really think so? Yes, I do. I like to tell my audiences before I start how much I admire them. Thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you for listening to me for a couple of minutes. You're good people. I want to support you. What can I do for you? So Reagan was like that. I watched him, right? He loved his audiences. He loved his audience. And that's how he built a bridge to his audience. In my book, again, Winning Your Audience, I talk about how critical it is to build a bridge to your audience and tear down the fourth wall. The fourth wall is the resistance that you feel from your audience and the skepticism that they feel. Because before you start to speak, and 65% of all communication is nonverbal, by the way, don't ever forget that.
Yep.
It's your own consciousness of yourself and your own authenticity and how you view your material. So they come in, they're like, oh, I don't know, I might listen to her or not, blah, blah, blah. I might fall asleep, might get on my phone. And I know because I've stood up in front of enough audiences and it's scary. But I'm telling you that you have to build a bridge to your audience. Now, one time I was talking to the great stage actress, Mary Martin, and many films. She's a very famous person. Won't be recognized by younger people today, but you look her up. She's an amazing person. And I said to her, we were standing on the south lawn of the White House one day, and I said to her, oh, why do your audiences like you so much? And she threw her arms around me. That was fun, right? And she said, Jim, I was born in Texas and I was born loving people. And they loved me back.
Yep.
Never forget that. Never forget that.
It's beautiful.
I was born loving people and they loved me back.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you see that Reagan loved people everywhere he went. When we went to in Ballyporeen, his hometown of his family background in Ireland, all the people, this wasn't staged either. Gather around him. Let's have a pint together, blah, 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 blah. Why did they like Reagan? The media called him elite, rich, which is a complete, absolute lie, and grew up poorer than any of them. And why did they like Reagan? You know why? Because he liked them.
Yep.
And they could tell that. You could always tell a phony, an effete person, right? But they liked him. So you know why? Because he liked them.
Nice. Yeah, people can see if you're not authentic, people can read you and they understand that you're not authentic. And so you're right. You need to love people. You need to love your audience. And it's not about you. It's about your audience, and which is really important. And I love it how you talk about how you raise people up, how you actually admire them and do it in an authentic way. So the show is called Leadership is Changing. When I say that term, what does that term mean for you?
Boy, it means so many different things. I work in the tech space, and so it's about the fourth industrial revolution, the blurring of boundaries between physical, digital, biological worlds. It's 3D printing, it's genetic engineering, it's quantum computing, it's AI, it's decarbonization, it's the pace of change. And so it's all of these things, but it's also having faith and having hope and marshaling the troops, so to speak, and pulling people together so that there is a process around change. There is a communication channel within change, and that people are included instead of excluded in the decisions that are going to be made that affect how they work, why they work. We've got 5 generations, 4 major races in the world, 195 countries make up this planet, 5,000 plus different ethnic groups, 9 time zones. And we all should have one goal when it comes to leadership, and that's leading the people effectively and making sure we keep them apprised of what's going on at all steps.
Yeah. Oh, nice. And when you say keep them apprised of each of the steps, what do you mean? What do leaders have to do to enable that?
It first starts with being as transparent as they possibly can and keeping the lines of communication open. It's using your IQ to show more EQ and making sure that people realize that you are, quote unquote, in the trenches with them going forward with the changes that are taking place. It's letting them know who they can turn to for support, what the websites are that they need to access the information from, which group of 5 is going to go first in this process, when will training take place? What resources will be available to them on the first day they log into this new tool, or whatever it is that shapes this change that they're dealing with? It's being inclusive. You talk about diversity and inclusion. You can be a company that's very diverse, having all of the right people in the right places from different backgrounds, different walks of life, ethnicities, races, creeds, etc. But that doesn't mean you're inclusive. That doesn't mean those people come into the office knowing that they're valued for what they do, that they are accepted for who they are, and that they have equal opportunities to thrive. And as a
Mm.
leader, unless you're providing that foundational safety net, so to speak, nobody's going to be comfortable with anything that's happening. And so you really have to always have that at the forefront of what you do.
And do you feel that, in your opinion, watching leaders around the world in different organizations, we talk about diversity and inclusion? Diversity seems to get a lot of sort of press, if I can put it that way. The inclusion, I think, sometimes gets forgotten, or it's because it's always the D and I, and it's the I gets left behind. Is that what your thoughts and your experience has been? And what can we do around that?
Such a great question, and one that is becoming more and more important, as you point out. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We started off with best of intentions in every entity across the world that we were going to become more diverse. But
Mm.
again, that didn't mean we were focusing on that inclusive piece so that people feel like they belong. Sometimes these roles are called diversity, inclusion, and belonging, diversity and inclusion and equity. So you get the gist of where I'm going here. That we have had to make a shift over the past few years from saying, yeah, we have sexual harassment training. Yeah, we have anti discrimination training. And that's our diversity program. You and I both know that's not going to be enough, no matter what the company is that says these things. So it's getting beyond the checkbox to making sure that as people are being interviewed and screened for interviews, that we're taking into consideration that we want our employee base to be a reflection of what society looks like. When I walk down the sidewalk, I don't know about you, if I look around, I don't see people who look exactly like me from my exact age group wearing the exact same kind of clothes as I am. I see very different people around me. And that's what we need to have more of in the workplace. And this is the first time in the history of the working world where we actually have 5 generations in the same building at the same time. So we have to be representative of the generational balance. We want to be representative of the gender balance and people of color and people of all different walks of life in leadership roles. And that's what's been changing over these past 5 to 10 years, wherein leaders are having to pull their thoughts together around what it means to be an inclusive leader, what it means to provide equitable opportunities, and what it means for them and for their teams and for the company if they are able to pay attention to all of this and hire the right people at the right time.
When you talk about the 5 generations in the building right now, this is really quite interesting to hear that. When you say the 5 generations in the building right now, all those generations will want things different from leadership. So, in a general, though, what do you think they want in leadership?
They want that opportunity to be heard and to be respected and to have the chance to stretch themselves. They want a leader who will really make them aware of what the team metrics are that they should be living up to and keep them informed as to where they stand within the team hierarchy. They also want a leader who is going to go to bat for them, speak for them and be on their behalf when there's opportunities for advancement or for additional learning programs that have to be nominated by a leader. And then obviously they want to make sure that leader is paying attention to what they have done successfully and celebrating it. Too often, someone goes the extra mile and yet nothing is ever said about it. And that's such a deflating thing for an individual. It makes them feel like, why did I do all that? Why did I stay here late or come in early or work over the weekend when nobody even acknowledged what I did? So leaders have to be willing and able to praise when it's right, to give considerate amounts of feedback that were not necessarily required in generations previously, and to really keep that line of communication open so that their people really know that the open door policy, which has been touted for what, the last 30 years, is a
Mm.
reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. And I think the big thing I'm hearing is that recognition or that celebrating even success for at times. And I don't know, I don't think it costs leaders much to actually recognize somebody. Just a few words to say, well done, or recognize them and maybe in front of their peers, in front of others. If not, just on a one-on-one basis. But it doesn't cost
Mhm.
anything. But then again, leaders struggle to do it. They're on to the next thing that they've got to get on with, another project. And we just got to get on with things, right? And it's just, hang on a sec, can we just take some stock and do some celebration here and recognize people? Because that has massive weight in helping people move forward.
Oh, absolutely. And we all have read the articles where it talks about how a person who feels appreciated always goes above and beyond. And when you acknowledge their knowledge and their experience and their efforts, they become your ally. And then when change does have to take place within the organization, they'll be on your side of the change instead of one of those naysayers because you have shown them that you respect them and they respect you in turn.
Yeah, nice. On your side of the change, being your ally, that's awesome. Do you want those advocates? Do you want those influencers on your side for sure? Hey, Alex, that's great. The show is called Leadership is Changing. And when I say that statement, what does that mean for you?
It's a little bit what I pointed to. So I think leadership has evolved, at least since I've been thinking about it and writing about it and working through it. And I think now, I think leadership has changed, and I think it's continuing to change. Like I mentioned, if we go back, it was, okay, who's the perfect leader? Let's find what the characteristics are and let's emulate those characteristics. We found that doesn't work. In fact, all of us can be great leaders if we find what's part of our DNA, if you will, our DNA leadership, and we can learn to be great leaders. So it's actually learned behavior. So you're not born with it. You can actually work on stuff and become better. So that was the whole debate. And I think it's evolved over time where it was leaders were the taskmaster and I got to be tough on people because that's going to give me the best out of them. And that kind of worked for a while in the context that started to appear. And you can think about sports where they emulated each other for a while. And then they started to realize that, no, the way to motivate people and the way to get the best out of people is to actually give them positive feedback. What's working well? What are their strengths? Let's the whole build on your strengths movement. I think that kind of led to a change. Now what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing is now the vulnerability is coming into the equation. The authenticity is coming. It was in the background, right? We had Jack Ma of Alibaba fame talking about that EQ was always way more important than IQ, right? So that started to come out, being more vulnerable, being more authentic. And now more recently, so this is a more recent phenomenon, and I think maybe a little bit before COVID, but it's really come up really since, is we actually need leaders that show way more empathy and way more compassion. And the reason why that's important is because there's actually a great equation that I saw in a book by Norman Fisher. So I highly recommend reading Norman Fisher. He's actually a really interesting person. And what he talks about is to really understand another person. And I think that's part of connecting with somebody, right? You really have to understand them. And I think to be an effective leader, you have to understand the people you lead, right? And there's a whole bunch, there's movies where we see that, there's TV shows, and then leaders that are effective, they really understand the people that they work with. And the two components of understanding, one is empathy. So I need to understand what you're going through, and I need to put myself in your shoes and really get a sense of what's it like for Dennis to be in this role in this organization and to really understand that. But on top of, so empathy isn't enough, right? Because we spent a lot of time on EQ is really a lot about empathy, right? And what Norman Fisher is saying, yeah, that's necessary, but not sufficient. What you need on top of empathy is compassion. You actually need to care about what they're going through. And you actually need to care about how Dennis feels about what he's going through. So not just understand what you're going through, but also care about you as you're going through it and actually care about how you feel about it, whether you're excited or whether you're challenged or whether you're frustrated. And those two things, and I've just written about that. The article just came out this week on creating a culture of empathy and compassion, which is actually a big component of psychological safety, which I've been writing about recently and thinking about. So how do we create an environment where leaders are empathetic and compassionate, but where all people are? So you create a culture of empathy and compassion, because I think that's what's going to get the best out of people. And yet we haven't really talked about it. We talk about it and think about it in very different contexts, but we don't talk about it or think about it or try to live it in organizational context, because it's all about numbers. It's all about you think. And now it's, no, you got to bring your heart. You got to bring compassion. You got to bring empathy. And they're going, one of the great quotes is when I mentioned this to some clients, and one person said, Alex, I'm an engineer. I don't know about empathy or compassion, but I realize that this is important and I need to start doing something about it, because we never really talk about it or think about it. So I think it has changed. And I think now it's going into this dimension, which is much more humanistic and much more sort of person to person and really connecting at that compassion level. I think it's amazing, but I think it's what's calling us moving forward.
Yeah, and I remember just a few years ago working with a leadership team of executives, more around the research and development side of things for an organization. And these guys in 10 years had never, ever got together face-to-face as a leadership team. Why? Because their executive vice president said, because we are engineers, we're not leaders. And so the new executive vice president brought them together, just based on what you're saying there, Alex, is so true, so important. A organization that doesn't have the compassion and the empathy, and maybe if we think about the pandemic that people have gone through, I think those leaders who have shown it versus those leaders that haven't shown it, well, have you seen anything like that? And what's been like the response of people who do show it and those who haven't shown it, in particular through the times of pandemic?
I think that's a really good question. So I think what's happened is when things were going really well, right? We've known growth for the past many years. This was across industries, across different regions of the globe. Leaders could get away with being okay. I could be an okay leader and still be effective because the results are going to be there, we're going to do well. Then when the pandemic hit, it required things that were really different from leaders, because all of a sudden people were working from home, and all of a sudden the people's personal context started to appear in their work context because they weren't physically separated. And then I was hearing from leaders as, Alex, I'm having conversations about people's family life, which I never heard about before, but now I'm not just talking about it because I'm actually seeing a little bit of it on video. I'm actually seeing a little bit of it. And now they're talking to me about their challenges they're facing on the home front, the kids being home all the time, maybe family members that are ill, or maybe they had ill parents. And now it's a lot more concerning. They actually started to see that if they didn't have the empathy and the compassion going in, it was actually being required of them more and more by their team members. And they're saying, I'm realizing I'm being asked something of me that was never asked of me before. And I'm not quite sure how to bring this out, but it's being required of me moving forward. And I think those that were able to realize it and started to work on it, being more vulnerable, being more authentic, being more empathetic, started to become more effective. And those that didn't see it and didn't adjust started to become less effective.
Wow.
And the organizations are now seeing the leaders that are really rising to the occasion and the leaders that are floundering. And they can be in the same organizations, and they're starting to notice those that are able to bring it, because all of a sudden it's being asked of them and they had it in them, but it was never required of them. And those that don't have in it, don't really care and aren't bringing it. And so they're starting to flounder. And so it's becoming way more obvious which direction their leaders are going in. And there will be leaders that will actually grow through this and actually become better leaders. And those that were okay, they're actually going downhill. It's actually not going in a positive direction for them. And now there's no place to hide as a leader. You can't hide in any of this. Yeah. So it's a good question that you put on the table, Dennis.
It's interesting because it's almost like they've gone into a virtual world and we're having to use Zoom or cameras and things like that now to see each other. So it's almost like we've gone away from each other into a virtual scenario to let the guard down, which is really quite interesting. And then the other one is, I remember this terminology from years ago, and it's just so true right now, just based on what you're saying, Alex. Hire the tech, hire the touch. In other words, the higher the technology, in other words, what we're experiencing right now because of this pandemic, we have to do this. We have to do more of the higher the touch, to be around the people, to get to know them more. Fascinating how it's just working out like that.
Yeah. And I think what you're pointing to is really the core of it. I think it was always true, but now it's become super obvious and super explicit. We need much more high touch leaders than we ever have in the past. And I think the organizations that will recruit and develop the higher touch leaders, I think those leaders will be more valuable. I think they will add more value to their teams, to their organizations, and to their clients. And I think all of us as leaders have to realize, okay, I might be relatively strong on empathy, compassion, vulnerability, authenticity, all of those things. But wherever I'm at, I'm going to have to raise all of those moving forward. So I could be at an 8, I'm probably going to have to be a 9. Or if I'm at a 9, I'm going to have to be and if I'm at a 2, I better get to a 5 as quickly as I can. Because I think when the pandemic kind of goes away, because eventually there'll be a vaccine or, something will diminish its impact, that requirement will still be there. Those leadership characteristics will still be important. And in fact, maybe more important post-pandemic, and organizations that are actually doing the return to work and stuff, they're starting to realize they need even more empathy because some people don't want to go back to work because they're worried. Why are they worried? Let's have that empathy conversation. Let's have that compassionate conversation. What's going on for you? So they're realizing they might even need it more post than during. So it's really interesting. I'm finding it really interesting.
Yeah. So what I'm finding is that some of the leaders that I'm actually coaching with who are now going back, because in this part of the world, we've actually come out of lockdown and we've gone back into the workplace and people are slowly going back into the office. They're actually struggling. They're finding it quite difficult. And so from actually doing it and being around other people, but emotionally, they're drained.
Yeah.
And because they've been giving, and now they've gone back and now they're having to give more because they're trying to help people get back and balance. So it's really interesting to see how that works.
And this is where the two are coming together. People need to know that they're going to be physically safe, right? When they return to work, right? So is there going to be distancing? Is there going to be masks? And organizations are really good at that, right? We've worked with organizations and others have worked with organizations where physical safety, they're on top of it. Accident rates are really low, all that stuff. Here's the thing. That's not going to be enough because people now want to feel psychologically safe. They want to feel that whatever emotion they're going to feel, that if they don't feel super comfortable going back to work, that it's okay for them to talk to their boss to say, you know what, Dennis, I get everything. We're putting in the hand sanitizers and the masks and everything, and I still don't feel safe. It's got to be okay for them to say that. And it's got to be okay to have that conversation. So it's one of those unique times where physical safety and psychological safety are coming together. And organizations say, we're doing everything we can on the physical side, and it's not enough. That's right. It's not enough because people on top of that have to feel psychologically safe, not just that they're going to be okay physically, but that they can talk about how they're feeling and having that be okay. And that if they want to take a little bit longer or they want to come in for shorter periods of time or whatever, that's going to be okay for them to express that. So this is a really interesting kind of time, not just in the history of virus pandemic, but also I think in terms of leadership. I think it's a sort of seminal moment that we're all going through as leaders.
Yeah, excellent. Wow. That's really good to see. Hey, the title of the show is Leadership is Changing. When I say that statement, what does that mean for you?
I think I see it as a visionary statement. It means we all have leadership styles that really suit. And I think if you can broaden that range, well, for instance, if you're a visionary job, he thought very big picture stuff, but he wasn't the one that was data driven and structured. He got other people to do that, but he had a vision that was compelling. So you need people like that. For me, change is understanding the essence of why you're doing it. Why? What are you trying to achieve from being a leader in the current day when things are uncertain? You're trying to influence people in uncertain times when people are stressed, asking for more, when sometimes you're not that person that's delivering it. So when you look at, what is it? So you're a commanding leadership, which is obviously necessary at times that we need a split decision real quick. I think you need those kind of leaders. I'm more affiliate leader, like affiliate leadership model, where I like to bring people together, build trust, a sense of belonging, and use communication to really drive that person to deliver the result. That's my style. And what your question is that we've got to be diverse in understanding the whole picture, because we're not all one. And if we can bring diverse thinkers into it, because I think that's the essence of solving what our current situation is. We need people to be diverse. And if you can bring people in that have a different way of thinking to solve a problem, then I think we need to be diverse in the way we think. The brain operates differently. We need a balanced approach.
Heck, Richie, it'd be just great for them to think, full stop, eh? That'd be a good start. But I think that you're right. The diversity side of things, brilliant. So if I take an analogy of a sporting side of things, and you've got players who have all got different positions, but if there's a player in there that understands all positions and understands how everyone works and understands everyone's strengths and what they do in their roles, and they can bring that forward to help everyone be the best that they can be, I think that's a skill that's really great. And so leadership and leading that change will be fantastic.
Yeah, 100%, Dennis. And I think not only on the field or in workplaces, I think what the method is now is to go deeper than that, go deeper behind who they are and what makes them tick. What is their family problems like? Because that influences the way people operate at workplaces and on the field of sport. There's just more behind the iceberg effect where, look, we've seen the result, but underlying that, there's a lot of other things that accommodate the pinnacle of that iceberg. And I think if we're savvy enough, if we're smart enough, if we have curiosity around thinking, and that's asking more questions and not being afraid of that. We just did a podcast just recently around psychological safety. And I think that's very important. Google just did, in 2017, they did a research around 187 companies, and the top of the list was psychological safety. And we're delving into that. We had a really good podcast about what that actually means. And if you're safe to question in an environment, and we spoke about that before, it's very rare you see that. It's very rare that I've seen in meetings and companies that they've actually asked a lot of questions and people actually are privy to open up about how they feel. Particularly if you're an extrovert or introvert, you're not going to say much if you're introvert, but they've actually got so much knowledge sitting there, but the questions never asked about being safe enough to explore that and ask questions. I've never been in a where you've got a meeting and they go, is there anything that you guys would suggest that we could improve the current situation? I've never been in that environment.
But that's a powerful question, right? And if you give people the space to be able to say that, and not just ask the question, but for them to actually respond, just imagine what might come up.
And that's the art of questioning. We're asking the wrong questions. Or most of the time, sometimes we do the loop questions, but we're hypnotized in most cases of asking the same stupid question over and over again and getting the same result. I think we really are hypnotized. I think, to be brutally fair in today, we've heard it all before. What do you think? Why can't I do this? I'm not sure if I can. So that's the limitation.
Yeah.
Instead of asking and being curious about opening the door to the mind and going, what else does that mean? How can we change it? You know, the certain things that we're questioning the same thing often enough, but we're not actually come up with the right questions to get better answers. Our brain's like a computer. What you input in, you'll get out.
Yep. We used to talk about this in computer programming days, GIGO, which is garbage in, garbage out. So it's the same thing. Depending what you go into your mind, it depends what comes out as well, for sure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianotsous. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.